Thanks, everybody. You are in the right spot. We are not starting late. I just wanted to give some time for people to join in, so we'll be starting in about 60 seconds. Thanks. Okay, thanks for joining. My name is Josh Valentine. I'm the Communications Director with the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, also known as SWEEP. You are attending Electrify Your Home in 2023. This is our webinar all about heat pumps, which you can see on the right of your screen. So we're very excited about that. Our latest webinar on heat pumps. We haven't done one in a little while. Speaking today, we have Neil Callaway. He's a building electrification specialist at SWEEP. Rachel Ellis, she's a communications fellow at SWEEP. David Petroy, he's the founder of NTS Energy. And Robert Foley, technical solutions specialist at ICAST. And ICAST is one of our allies. We got some news at NBC News on Valentine's Day. Neil was quoted on a very exciting article that was reporting that heat pumps are growing in popularity. So if you want to check that out, just do a quick Google search for the title of that article and it'll pop up. Neil is quoted as saying, after buying an electric vehicle or taking the bus more often or carpooling to reduce their travel-related emissions, maybe people hear about heat pumps. The next biggest impact thing they can do personally is to install a heat pump to reduce their emissions from heating their home. And hopefully they will save a little money on their heating bill at the same time. So we are happy that we're getting some more news out there about the popularity of heat pumps. It seems to be happening every week. Some technical specifications for the webinar. We will be having a Q&A at the very end. So we're having 4 presentations. And at the very end of the presentations, we will be getting to some of your questions. So if you have a question, go into the Q&A box on your Zoom control panel and enter them in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. A recording of this webinar will be available and will be sent out to everyone who registered and everyone on SWEEP's email list, which you can join on our website, swenergy.org. We will be sending that out the latest Tuesday, but I usually like to get them out the very next day, so it'll probably be tomorrow. And we will send the full slide deck with all the presentations along with that. I'm going to hand it off to Neil Callaway now. He's going to give you a very short background about SWEEP, and then he'll take it from there.
Thank you, Josh. I've been with SWEEP for about 13 years, and we are a nonprofit organization that promotes energy efficiency, beneficial electrification, and clean transportation in 6 Southwest states, shown here, including Colorado. Next slide. I'm going to start by giving a brief introduction and overview of the webinar, and then I'm going to talk about all the federal and state tax credits and utility rebates for heat pumps. And then I'll introduce Rachel Ellis, and she's going to talk about some success stories involving heat pumps in both new and existing homes. And then we will hear from Dave Petroy of NTS Energy. He will provide some technical information and some tips about how to make your heat pump projects more successful and cost-effective, focusing on single-family homes. And then finally, we have Rob Foley from ICAST, who will discuss some case studies for multifamily housing and provide some tips about how to make those projects more successful. Next slide. To begin, I thought I would briefly explain what a heat pump is. Basically, a heat pump is like an air conditioner, but it's reversible so that in addition to providing cooling in the summer, it also provides heating in the winter. Isn't that amazing? And they can be either ducted, like shown in this diagram, and in this case, there's a heat exchanger in the air handler, provides heat in the winter, circulates through the house, very similar to a gas furnace. And they can also be ductless, as I will show on the next slide. And there are cold climate heat pumps, which maybe some of you have heard about. And those can be either ducted or ductless. And basically, they are designed to operate efficiently down to like -5 degrees F or lower. And they have a few extra features, for example, a variable speed compressor. And they do work very well down to these cold temperatures. And we have some examples like Rachel will discuss. Next slide. Here's a diagram of a ductless heat pump system. We also call these mini splits. And look, there are no ducts. The refrigerant comes from the outdoor compressor unit to an indoor unit. There can be several indoor units for each outdoor compressor unit. And the indoor unit has a heat exchanger and a fan, a small fan, and it provides either the warm air in the winter or the cool air in the summer. And they work very efficiently and they work very well. Next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about the current state of the heat pump market. And at least in Colorado, we think the heat pump market is moving along nicely. More and more homeowners are asking about heat pumps, for example, to replace their aging air conditioning system or furnace system. And the equipment has been steadily improving, as Dave will discuss. And we have made a lot of progress in training more HVAC contractors in installing heat pumps, which is really important. And we do have more work to do, especially in the homeowner education and contractor training areas. And next slide. Along those lines, we have a coalition in Colorado called the Beneficial Electrification League of Colorado, or BELCO, which created this website, Love Electric. Love Electric has a lot of good information about heat pumps and heat pump water heaters to help educate homeowners. And even if you don't live in Colorado, no matter what state, this information may be helpful to you. And in addition, under the resources tab shown up there, you can find all the qualified installers of heat pumps or heat pump water heaters in Colorado. And so that's very useful. Next slide. Now I will talk about the tax credits and rebates, and we'll start with existing homes. Next slide. There are new federal tax credits from the IRA, which does not stand for Irish Republican Army. It's the Inflation Reduction Act. And the main thing I want to say here is there's a 30% tax credit up to $2,000 per taxpayer for heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. And they do have to meet minimum efficiency standards, which are a bit complicated, and they're on the next slide. The heat pump water heater basically just has to be Energy Star. Okay, next slide. I'm skipping over that other stuff because it doesn't apply until 2024, so let's, 1 year at a time. Here's the minimum efficiency requirements. I'm not going to really go over this either, but you can see it's a little different for the northern states versus the southern states. And you can look at this later. If you have any questions, let us know. And for now, we'll move on. So next slide. There are also state tax credits if you live in Colorado or New Mexico, and those are shown here. And for Colorado, for example, these tax credits or exemptions apply to the equipment cost. So it adds up to 12.9%, which is pretty substantial. Okay, next slide, please. And then in addition to those, we also have utility rebates, which in Colorado have been increasing. So here's some examples. You can see like Tri-State Member Co-ops, 1,800, XL Energy, 1,500, and Holy Cross Energy is a little more generous. And you can find all the utility and local rebates in Colorado at this website, loveelectric.org/rebates. And if you're not in Colorado, then you have to go to your electricity provider's website and see what they have, and they probably have something. Okay, next slide. And so this is just to sum up, what do we have for existing homes and how do all these add up? So here's an example. Let's say you buy a 4-ton heat pump and it's efficient, it meets the utilities rebate requirements, it also meets the federal requirements, let's say, and the equipment cost is $8,000, so maybe the total cost is $16,000, but the equipment cost is what matters for the state tax credit. So you're going to get the $2,000 federal tax credit, and the state tax breaks would be $1,030. And if your utility is a Tri-State Member Co-op, for example, then you get $1,800. So you have a total of $4,800. And the main point here is that if you're, for example, if you're replacing your air conditioner with a heat pump, the cost might be $2,000 more for the heat pump. And so the $4,800 shown here is going to more than cover that. So you should definitely go for the heat pump. Don't even think about replacing your air conditioner with just an air conditioner. Okay, next slide. And finally, if you need a loan to buy your nice new heat pump, here's 2 options. If you live in Colorado, you can get a low interest loan through the program shown here. It's called Renew, and I think we have we'll include the link with the final slides that we send out. And if you don't live in Colorado, you can ask your HVAC contractor, and maybe they have some financing for you as well. Okay, next slide. Now we talk briefly about new homes and what's available there. Next slide. Under the federal category, the IRA, there's a couple of tax credits that would go to the builder. For example, if it's a Energy Star certified home, the builder can get $2,500. So that's enough on that for now. Next slide. And the state tax credits for new homes are pretty much the same as we just discussed for existing homes. They would go to the buyer of the new home. And so again, in Colorado, you would get like the 12.9% on the equipment cost, and New Mexico, you get the rebates shown here. Okay, next slide. And then finally, again, there's utility rebates, and these generally will go to the builder, which makes sense because the builder is generally the one who's making the decision about whether to put the heat pump in the new home, unless you're designing your own custom home. So the first 2, they're pretty much the same rebates that would have gone to the existing home, but now they go to the builder. So it's good. It's $1,800 is significant, and that's the kind of level of rebate we would want to see. Okay, next slide. And then we have an example, just summary of what do we have for new homes. We have the federal tax credits, which generally are going to go to the builder, utility rebates to the builder, state tax credits to the home buyer. And in this example, if the new home has a heat pump water heater, total equipment cost of $12,000. The home buyer is going to get state tax exemptions of about $1,500, and the rebates to the builder for these pieces of equipment are going to be $2,150. So there you go. And now I will turn it over to Rachel to talk about some case studies.
Thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. Like Neil said, I'm Rachel. I'm a communications fellow for SWEEP. So I'll just be taking a few minutes to highlight some case studies that we developed and published on that Love Electric website that Neil talked about. They published back in December. So I'll just be giving a brief overview of a few of the studies that we currently have on the site, 2 examples of retrofitted homes, and then 2 examples of new construction home builds, all within the state of Colorado. And across the board, I would say homeowners are really happy with their heat pumps, the efficiency and the reduction in the energy bills that they've seen because of them. That's all really great. So my goal is to try to use these 4 examples to showcase the various types of projects that were done in different climates and financial parameters. So up first, we have an existing home in Boulder, Colorado. This is a home owned by a couple named Tom and Amy. They've lived in Boulder in this house. It's a mid 20th century house. It's about 1,600 square feet. They've been there for about 30 years. And an energy audit a few years back made them aware that maybe they should pursue some kind of transition off of gas in their home. But for a while, they encountered multiple HVAC companies who actually shrugged off the idea of or advised against getting a heat pump. But they actually talked with Dave Petra, who's on the call, and he helped steer them in the right direction. So they decided to go ahead and install a heat pump. And last spring, I believe, is when they did the install. They worked with Kapler Mechanical, which is a local and family-owned business up in Boulder, I believe, and they put in an air source ducted heat pump system that had a backup furnace. And that was mostly just decided based on the technology that was available to them at the time, as well as just what was most cost-effective for Tom and Amy. So all in all, they invested about $20,000 in their system, and that's after rebates from the city of Boulder and Excel. You can go to the next slide. And that's Tom and Amy. And I know that since installing their heat pump, they're really proud to report that they've seen about an 80% reduction in gas consumption for heating their home, which is incredible. And they've successfully reduced their carbon emissions, and it's all while having a quieter and more comfortable system. And a big bonus, Tom and Amy are Neil's neighbors. So they can really work together to lead the charge, I think, for homeowners in their area, which is really exciting. You can go to the next slide. And then this is another house that was retrofitted. It's located in Lakewood, Colorado. It's owned by a couple named Jim and Susan. And I think Susan and maybe Jim too are on the call. So hi to you both. Jim and Susan have lived in their also mid 20th century home for about 20 years. It's a former World War II barracks house. So lots of history behind it. And their furnace was giving out. They were really aware of how old it was a couple of years ago. So that awareness combined with the knowledge they gained from a Denver home and garden show introduced Jim and Susan to the concept of heat pump technology. So they were pretty swift to replace their furnace altogether. And now they have 2 Mitsubishi heat pump systems. And they spent about $14,300, and that's also after rebates. And they have a heat pump that is ducted through most of their house, one that's non-ducted that services their kitchen, and then a ductless mini split system that's in their master bedroom. Next slide. And I think what's really special for Tom and Amy, or excuse me, for Jim and Susan, they used to receive letters from Excel that notified them that they were in the top 10% of high energy consumption for their area. And since installing their heat pump, they've been able to significantly reduce their energy consumption, which is awesome. And they also feel they've reduced the risk of carbon monoxide exposure and feel that their heat pumps provide excellent comfort and operate really quietly and efficiently. So with both these retrofit cases, I think it's important to note that both Tom and Amy and Jim and Susan had to do diligent research, and they had specific financial parameters when making these transitions. So there can be a greater learning curve, I think, just in understanding where to start, how to know what's financially feasible. So it's a sense of urgency too that I think just compels the homeowners like them to just want to get started, even if it takes time and energy to find the right contractors or HVAC companies. There is a way to be on the same page and be informed and confident about the technology that you can put into existing frameworks within your homes. And if you go to the next slide, conversely, I think building or buying a new home affords homeowners and HVAC contractors the opportunity to be in total control from the get-go and setting whatever standards they deem necessary for home efficiency. So these next 2 examples show that range in affordability and creativity when it comes to building all electric new homes or buying into some kind of net zero community. You can go to the next slide. So this example This is a development that was, or it's in Basalt Vista, Colorado. Habitat for Humanity and the Roaring Fork Valley launched an affordable townhouse project back in the fall of 2020, where they built, they partnered with many people to get the funding and the resources to build 9 new net zero townhomes that house 27 families. So Jeremy and Lissa Duncan are one of those families that were actually able to win the housing lottery in order to buy a 4-bedroom home here in this development. So it all came with solar panels, a ductless air source heat pump system, a 50-gallon heat pump water heater, and induction cooktops. So if you go to the next slide, this is Jeremy and Lissa and their 2 kids. So for them, of course, affordable housing, and this is why the project was launched, was to just really try to combat the housing crisis in this area in Colorado. So of course, the Duncan family, I think more than anything, are just feeling relieved that they can live in this efficient home and have spent less than $400,000 on the home itself. But their energy costs are significantly lower. They spend on average about $15 to $20 a month on their energy bills. And their feedback was really great. They know that their temperature remains really comfortable, even when it does get quite cold this time of year. And I know Jeremy had joked that he had to adapt his heat settings, just making pancakes or something simple like that on induction cooktop. You can really see the significance just in how much the performance is greater, I think, with induction. And because they have 2 kids, they're also really happy about the difference in air quality that they can tell exists within their home. You can go to the next slide. And then this is a really cool example. These are 2 townhomes that are next to each other in Golden. Resident and homeowner for these 2 townhomes, Mike Ambrose. He had intended on building on this property. He had bought it up kind of, half a dozen years ago and just wasn't sure what he was going to do with it until he connected with Peter Ewers, who's a high performance home architect up in Golden. And so he kind of became the inspiration for Mike to not use gas at all and to completely build electric homes that actually meet Energy Star new home standards and certifications. So these townhomes are about 2,300 square feet, and they combine both ducted and ductless systems, which is really interesting. It's possible to have some kind of hybrid system in a new or existing home. So these townhomes have 2 cold climate heat pump systems. One's about a 2.5-ton system that services the basement and the main level, and those are ducted and ductless. And then they have a smaller 1-ton ducted system for the upstairs, and both have an electric resistance backup. And then he also has a 50-gallon heat pump water heater, induction, and solar. So if you go to the next slide. This is Mike. He's got 3 boys, and those are his 2 twin 14-year-olds. And I know he echoes the same sentiment as everybody else that I've mentioned. He's really happy with his energy costs and the significant reduction in those. He lowered his carbon footprint. He's more comfortable in his home and more comfortable with the technology. But I think for him and for a lot of families, what's really cool is that educational piece too. I think his sons, growing up in the age of climate change, are really conscious of what that means and what that implies for them and their future. And so I think it can be kind of a family affair when you think about how can you better influence, your air quality or the ways that you can reduce your own emissions, and it starts at home. So it's a really powerful, I think, outlook that Mike had of this is something that he's doing to set a good example for his sons. Next slide. So that was just, again, a brief overview, just a few examples of what it could look like to start kind of taking that step to electrifying everything. And I think while it might feel overwhelming, these studies are just a way to demonstrate how taking active steps as an individual is not just possible, but like I said, really empowering and really exciting that we can take the opportunity with all the funding that we have to be able to do so. And I think what puts it into perspective for me is just with all the research out there, some research from Princeton, it says in the next 10 years, consumer actions, like buying an electric vehicle or trying to adopt efficient technology in our home, that's contributing to a significant percentage of our carbon emissions. So if we can reduce that, that takes a huge burden off of this fight we have for climate change. And we at Sweep feel that no matter how big or small an upgrade, it can serve as a catalyst for those kinds of solutions that we believe can contribute to a healthier and more efficient world. So If you want to see more examples, the link is right there on that slide. You would just go to loveelectric.org and then /case studies. So you can review these examples, and then there's 3 or 4 more that you can take a look at. So that's all I've got. I'll hand it back to Neil. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. That was great. Now we have just a few recommendations here in order to continue to move the market and encourage more heat pumps. First of all, we would like to encourage electric utilities to consider more generous rebates to builders for heat pumps in new homes. There's a little gap there in the federal funding, as I mentioned, and utilities can help that in that area. It's an important area. And also for new homes, local governments, as you're updating your building codes, to consider electric preferred requirements, which means that if the home does install gas heating equipment, then it should have higher efficiency requirements compared to homes that use heat pumps, or higher efficiency requirements than all electric new homes. And then finally, for HVAC equipment manufacturers and their distributors, we encourage them to really start to push heat pumps in place of new central air conditioning equipment, and to provide more training and more marketing support for heat pumps. And now with that, I will introduce Dave Petroy. And Dave, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take over.
Hi, I'm Dave Petroy. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I've been living with heat pumps for about 20 years now. And what I'm going to go through is some recommendations and tips for homeowners. Try to simplify what can be a confusing story sometime. I looked at a lot of the question and answers, some fantastic ones. I think I'll give a prize to Tom Wicker for the question on how does forest fire smoke affect the outdoor units. It's something I'm going to have to talk to the manufacturers about. Next slide, please. I just wanted to step back for a second before I get into all the tips, etc., and show how far we've come in the last 13 years. We've come, as they say, we've come a long way, baby. The equipment at the top, I'm not going to read it all, but amazing improvements in how well it works, how cold, defrost, etc. And then also the amount of availability of equipment. But in 2010, each manufacturer might have 1 heat pump or 2 heat pumps. Now it's up and down the product lines with cold climate heat pumps throughout. So lots of products available. Neil talked about all the financial support we're getting. And another thing is the cost. There's more cost balance between gas and electrical prices these days. Going forward, in order to really adopt this technology, which is really at the forefront now, we need to make the purchasing process easy. It can't be more complicated for heat pumps than, say, calling up a couple contractors and getting a furnace or an AC installed. We really want kind of the heat pump to be the core of a new heating and cooling system for a home. It's just the technology there. It makes sense. Next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly in my 10 minutes about things to think about if you're building a new home, if you got an existing home with ducts, and if you have an existing home with some kind of a radiant system. Next slide. So let's talk about new homes, and I'm just calling these sort of general things you should have in your mind when you think about it. So if you're building a new home, you want to do, and this is Colorado, some of the other states in SOUP's territory, you might not quite need the cold climate, especially Arizona and New Mexico. You want a cold climate heat pump. And there's a lot of discussion, and it can get confusing about sizing them, but basically say to the contractor, a manual J, that's how you size any heating and cooling system. And you basically can say, does the heat pump have the 100% capacity to heat my house when it gets to be 10 degrees or lower outside? If it does, you've got, a system that's sized very well. And also what this does is you're going to combine the heat pump with either a gas furnace or electrical inside. It greatly minimizes the use of that. And you'll see in a couple slides what I mean. People need to think now, well-built homes with all the new codes are as comfortable air systems are now as comfortable as radiant. The walls used to be cold. The floors used to be cold. People loved radiant. It was the absolute highest standard. It was the most efficient. It's like air and the housing shells have caught up. So just keep that in mind. Still, you can have radiant and combo with warm floors, et cetera, but the difference is greatly reduced. The other thing you need to think about, not just heating and cooling now, is fresh air system. And heat recovery fresh air is just a more energy efficient way to get fresh air in your house. I don't have time to go into it maybe in the Q&A, but you need to have that. Think about it now. We're building houses so tight. In the winter, we don't want any cold air getting in. In the summer, we want no cool air getting out. We want no smoke from fires getting in, but we have to have ways to get some fresh air. The other thing about it, in the past, I used to think about, oh, I'm going to put one system in and I'll figure out how to get the heat and cooling all through all the floors. Now it's a little bit different puzzle. You have all these sort of these opportunities with different stuff. So you can think about the basement and the different floors as three parts of a puzzle, and you put it all together with a whole system. And I know people have asked about, well, if I go all electric, what's going to happen if we have power outages? Well, there's many things. You can go, fireplace, wood stoves. If you got blowers, you need a little electrical, or you could put a furnace with the heat pump, the dual fuel. But remember, even in that case, you still need some electrical to operate the computer boards in the furnace and the blower. So no matter what, you'll need a little bit of juice there with batteries or whatever. Next slide. Next slide, Josh. So there's really three approaches when you build a new home. And you can go with a ducted system. The middle one is you can do the ductless mini split with a little electric in small rooms like bathrooms, etc. Or you can do, if you want to have the radiant in-floor system and a boiler for comfort, you can combine that with the mini split ductless for different areas where you don't need the warm floors, you want cooling. And this is just, a sort of a real qualitative way, increasing costs. In terms of like my contributing to pollution, obviously with all heat pumps, there's nothing coming out your chimney here. Even if you put a small furnace in, it's not going to be a few days a year versus all year. Here, it depends on how much you use each system. And then you can just look across. You can read the deck when you get it, but ducting, everybody used to have ducting, or except for radiant. Now you can go with no ducting. You're going to want it. Filtering is good on all the systems. You want to think about that fresh air and humidification. There's a little difference there in zoning. Here's a little side note. I didn't know where to throw it in, but I need to throw it in somewhere. If you're putting an addition on a house, existing home, this mini split's a great way to go. You don't have to upsize your furnace or your boiler or add ducts, etc. You can put that in. It's a great way to go. So what do I mean about the puzzle? What I mean about the puzzles, I look at a house and say, the basement with these super insulated basements, I might need hardly any heat at all. I sit in my basement now, I have one little duct vent, hardly heated. In the main floor, maybe I'll think about I'm going to use some ducts in the basement because I don't have to worry about the ceiling space. Oh, but the second floor, maybe I'll do ductless. So you've got these opportunities. It's really great. And then I know a lot of you are like, okay, I want to reduce my emissions, and all these will, greatly reduce your emissions over 15 years lifespan. There'll be little differences depending on what you're using, but think of it as you're really doing your contribution to making the air better. Go ahead. Next slide, please, Josh. So what about existing homes with ducts? And you've got three options. You can go cold climate heat pumps, sized properly down to 10 degrees. So that's where 10 degrees outdoor temperature. That's Colorado. New Mexico, Arizona, it might be a little lower. A little warmer, might only be 15, 20. Utah is similar to Colorado. With supplemental furnace, this is called a dual fuel. So my heat pump's going to do most of my heating 9 to 10 months of the year. I'm going to use the furnace for the couple coldest months, and actually these systems are very sophisticated. They'll sort of trade off back and forth, furnace, heat pump, even in the coldest months. The other option is you can look at high efficiency heat pumps, work well in Colorado. You'll size those down to 20 degrees with supplemental heat. So you're trading off a little bit with your costs, your first cost, but you're still going to get a lot of heat pump heating, and it's going to do the majority of the year. The final strategies, you can go with the cold climate heat pump, not have a furnace, just have a fan coil with electrical heat. But as people asking the questions, sometimes this is going to require an electrical panel upgrade. And, you have to decide if you want to go with the electrical panel upgrade at this point in time or wait. And the other thing is a little bit with the ducts. Next slide, please. So sorry, this looks a little bit crazy to try to make somewhat of a simplified decision tree, because you've got those three options, but really what equipment you have in your house is important. So let's say I'm looking at my air conditioner. Man, my air conditioner conked out. Or I'm looking at an older air conditioner. I'm like, I don't want it to conk out before the summer. Or as someone said in the comments, I'm ready for AC. Well, it depends on how old your furnace is, what you want to do. And because we don't necessarily want people taking two really new furnaces, just throwing them in the landfills or trash. So if the furnace is less than 13 years old, we'll think about it as half the lifespan of a furnace. Furnaces are 20 to 30 years. You're going to keep your furnace, and you're going to do one of the two options, either the cold climate with the furnace or the high efficiency. Now, when you do this, you kind of want to lean toward the same brand as the existing furnace, because you want the equipment to work well together. It's not essential. There's some brands that work very cleverly with all kinds of different brands, but in general. And you want to get quotes for both options so you can consider it. Let's jump down to this situation here. I got an old furnace. I have an old air conditioner. Well, it's a kind of a no-brainer. You're going to replace both of them, and you're gonna look at talk to the contractor. You got your three options. I can go with the cold climate and the furnace. I can go high efficiency. I can do my heat pump without a furnace, and again, a matched one. Next slide, please, Josh. Okay, so now you got the opposite one. Man, my furnace just died, or it's going to die. And I should encourage people now, really, you don't want to wait for the failure, because right now, contractors and equipment, everything's really busy in Colorado, almost no matter what you're going for. So if it's in the middle of the winter and you're suddenly calling, you're not going to get a good choice. You're not going to have good opportunities. So let's say you have an old furnace and you're thinking about it before next winter, and you have an AC that's not very old, less than 7 years old. Well, I'm not going to promote throwing away good equipment. So, and especially if it's gas. So you can replace your furnace with a really good furnace, keep your AC, and wait a few years. In 3 or 4 or 5 years, now when your AC is bad, goes down or getting aged, I'm going to throw a heat pump in. Let's go to the opposites. Okay, and then I should also talk about this scenario. If you're on propane or electric, by putting in a heat pump, you save 60% or plus off your bills. So you save a lot of money. So you really, in that case, want to look at and say, well, can I maybe I'll replace both. I'll actually put the heat pump in right now, and you've got your options. And the same if your AC's old, then it's like, okay, I'm going to do both of these. Next slide, please. All right, 2 more slides to go, folks. And so a lot of you out there might say, I just really want to do something good. I want to change out my system. I want to eliminate gas, or I want to really, get my contribution to GHG down. I'd say if you've got a furnace that's middle age or older and an air conditioner, so your furnace is kind of past the halfway point, the air conditioner's past the halfway point, you can do your planned replacement. You can get folks in. It's great. You're not in a rush. You can get all your options. You contemplate them and really think about what you want to do. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, sorry. I guess I have three more slides. Okay, so radiant heated homes and additions, and this is the trickiest one, but man, this is still a good solution. Your priority determines your best strategy. So there's really most people come and say, there's a couple of reasons. I got radiant in-floor heating or radiant baseboard. I really need to do something. So one is I want to save money on my heating bill and emissions reduction. If you're on propane or electricity, you're going to save a ton. If you're on gas right now, I'm going to just say on par. I mean, it depends which utility, what your gas is, what's the month of the year. You know, you might be save 10%, 15% one way or the other, but on par, whereas in the past it used to not be. The other reason is cooling and increased comfort. So you're thinking about the first one. There's really one thing you want to think about. You want to look at your house and say, what are the largest volume rooms I can heat with a single indoor unit? Because these, the outdoor unit, you put it down there, and then when you start adding indoor units, you start adding cost to each one. So if I can take, and really a sweet spot, if I can put an outdoor unit and I can put 2 indoor units and heat, let's say, half my house or the great room and the kitchen, I've really got good bang for the buck. If it's cooling, obviously you're looking at, okay, my master bedroom's hot. I got a bedroom here, a bedroom there. With the mini split, the ductless, you can actually get these small units that can be hit up in the ceiling, up in the attic, above bathrooms, that with just it's still ductless, but with little ducts to go to each bedroom. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. Get a lot of questions about, do I go with cold climate or high efficiency? Electric heater, propane, it's a no-brainer. Cold climate, because you just want to try to get heat pump to do as much as possible. If you got natural gas boiler, then you have a choice. You can still go cold climate, or you can go with high efficiency, because you're not like trying to drive all that. High efficiency will still do well, save you money. So you've got a little more of a choice. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So, dear homeowners out there, or homeowners to be, I saw some questions, some of the chat about, contractors, some are reluctant. Just, be knowledgeable, insist on heat pump options. The stuff works. It's the foundation of a good heating system. And if the contractor's reluctant, doesn't want to do it, move on to someone else. And there's lots of resources, sweet websites. Get a couple of quotes. Pricing is all over the place. Make sure you get an equipment brand. There's all kinds out there, but I would suggest you get one that has a distributor in Colorado, carries the product line. Are there parts? Look at the warranties. And finally, the last thing is contractor experience with the brand and with the type of equipment. If a person's done lots of ducted and you're ducted, that's good. If they're mini split, you want mini split, that's good. And I believe that's it. Next, Josh, I think that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave. A lot of information to chew on. And now I will turn it over to Rob. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Greetings. I'm Rob Foley. I work for ICAST. We're a nonprofit based in Lakewood, Colorado. Next slide, please. We're an interesting little nonprofit. We specialize in the affordable housing market. We try to help low-income properties to stay low-income properties, and we do that mainly by helping them to become more energy efficient. So we're actually a nonprofit general contractor. Next slide, please. And so, we act as a general contractor to help property owners to retrofit multifamily properties, become more energy efficient. And one of the main ways we do that is by installing heat pumps. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of case studies of properties that we've done that, where we've had a retrofit. These were both in the Salt Lake City area. And here we had a property that had resistance electric baseboard and crazy high utility bills. And here we put in mini split heat pumps. And because they had such an old and efficient system, these guys paid for themselves in about 5 years with just a little bit of extra installation and mainly just the retrofit with the heat pumps. Next slide. This is a really interesting project, 8-story high rise that had an old boiler chiller system. And we helped the homeowners association to abandon that system and put in cold climate heat pumps in each of the units. One of the things that really facilitated that here is you can see they had these balconies, so we had a place to put the outdoor units in order to do this retrofit. And so that's one of the real challenges with multifamily, especially when you have things like homeowners associations, is there's a lot of logistics to work through. And so, so we've got a lot of experience helping property owners to kind of see the path through as they try to figure out how to retrofit existing buildings to become more energy efficient and reduce their carbon footprint. So what are some of the lessons we've learned along the way as we've helped supervise these 15,000 or so heat pump installations? Next slide. Anyone that has central AC is a perfect target for retrofitting with heat pumps. And in fact, nobody who has central AC should ever think for the next 10 years about replacing their central air conditioner with an air conditioner. And the reason is real simple. It's a dollars and cents reason, that with all these incentives that Neil talked about, it will rarely, if ever, be cheaper to replace your air conditioner with an air conditioner as opposed to a heat pump. The incentives are extraordinary, and they're there for that reason, to move the needle. And so anybody who has an old or a dead air conditioner should only be thinking about replacing it with a heat pump because of those incentives that are available. And one of the things that we recognize in the multifamily field is that most property owners think of things in terms of a replacement cycle. In other words, if my air conditioners are getting to be about 10 or 15 years old, I know I've got to replace them all sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. And it makes a lot more sense to replace them all at once than to do them one at a time, piecemeal. And so when we're talking with those property owners, we recognize that we get that bite at the apple sometimes only every 30 years. And so we want to make the most of that. And especially with the incentives that we have right now, we need to be educating property owners that next time you're biting that apple to replace those air conditioners, we want to be replacing them with heat pumps. That's the sweet spot right now, because that's something that property owners are already doing. They're already replacing that equipment. And so educating them about the incentives available and the superiority of heat pump technology to move at least some of their heating load to heat pumps just makes a ton of sense in almost every circumstance. Next slide, please. And since in the last year, gas prices have doubled. Now I happen to be in New Mexico, where gas prices haven't doubled, they've tripled. That has made, like David mentioned, the operational costs between a high efficiency heat pump and a natural gas furnace about on par. So that argument that, well, it's going to increase my operating costs is no longer true because of the price of gas has gone up. Next slide, please. So those IRA incentives that we talked about earlier, and part of the problem with a federal government program like this is that it sounds great, and then you got to wait for the details to be worked out by the bureaucrats. And that's our problem with the IRA right now, is the incentives are going to be fantastic, but we're still waiting for the rules to be made. And so it's still going to be another year maybe before we know what those incentives are. But you need to be aware that there's just tremendous incentives available once the rules get made. And so, of course, in the multifamily market, where property owners are extremely price sensitive, and part of that is simply because a lot of times they're not paying the utility bill, but they are buying the equipment. Having those incentives is going to help tremendously. And of course, like Neil talked about, stacking incentives is also going to help. So whether it's the tax credits plus the utility plus the state incentive, or whatever incentives happen to be in your market, that's one of the things that's going to make both putting in heat pumps and heat pump water heaters very viable for many, many multifamily owners. And one of the things that we found in multifamily in particular is those mini split type units are almost always our solution when it comes to heat pumps, because they can also be ducted. Sometimes we call them ductless, but that's kind of a misnomer because they can also be ducted. And we find that those are kind of the value proposition in multifamily, many times, mostly because they're only available up to about 3 tons right now in that. And so in those smaller capacities, they work really well in multifamily, where many times when you get into single family homes, you need bigger capacities that really aren't available in those mini split type units. And so compared to the bigger unitary product, you call the traditional manufacturers, we call those the unitary lines. They got a ways to go in terms of the performance and the value that we see in the mini split type equipment. Next slide, please. But proper sizing is critical. David talked about that a lot, right? And one of the traps can be if I've got an existing home with like a 3-ton air conditioner, thinking that, well, now I just need to get a 3-ton heat pump. Not necessarily, because that air conditioner was sized for cooling load, and now we're going to be very much more concerned about heating load. And so we need to make sure that we're sizing that heat pump appropriately for the heating load, not just the cooling load. And so one of the things that can help is when we're thinking about replacing mechanical equipment, thinking in terms of doing shell improvements first, like insulation and windows and air sealing. Doing those things first allows us to install smaller equipment, as long as we're doing our proper our equipment sizing, like David mentioned there. Next slide, please. And so David mentioned a lot about dual fuel, and what's great about dual fuel is that where we have a client that's kind of hesitant about heat pump technology, it can allay some of those fears. And it can also help reduce the cost of the installation, because if we're leaving that gas furnace in place, like David mentioned in some circumstances, and we're replacing that air conditioner with a heat pump, that's going to reduce our costs because we don't have to buy a new air handler. And then one really nice thing about dual fuel is that we can do what's called an economic balance point analysis. And what that helps us to do is to know what the most expensive or least expensive heating fuel is at any outdoor air temperature, because heat pumps lose efficiency as the outdoor air temperature gets colder. And so by doing that, we can have the confidence that regardless of the outdoor air temperature, we're always using the least expensive fuel, which is another big advantage to having a dual fuel system. Next slide, please. In terms of new construction, when it comes to multifamily, we have found that all electric developments have already achieved cost parity in terms of while the heat pump equipment tends to be more expensive, that cost is more than covered by not having to install gas infrastructure. And so in new developments, new construction, we really find that there is no real cost difference between a gas plus air conditioner approach versus a all electric approach. So that's great news in terms of new construction going forward. And of course, when we don't have gas, that makes indoor air quality better. That becomes another selling point with all electric homes. Next slide, please. And like a lot of the comments we've been seeing in the Q&A, one of the biggest challenges with heat pump adoption are the contractors. There are plenty of contractors that just don't believe in heat pumps yet. And so like David said, if you got one of those, maybe you just need to be talking to a different contractor, because it just takes work, unfortunately, until we get up to speed for contractors to be part of the team instead of part of the roadblocks. Next slide. And finally, this is a big one in terms of a lot of the projects we do. If you're going to retrofit 50 apartments, do a test install. Right? In other words, don't just do all 50 at once. Do 1 or 2 apartments first and troubleshoot all the issues before you do a huge project. We have found that time and time again is a big saver of our process. So those are just some of the highlights that we've experienced in the multifamily field. Let's give it back to Josh.
Thank you, Rob. That was great.
Thank you, Neil, David, Robert, and Rachel. We are on time and we've got 20 minutes for questions, and we have almost 100 of them. So we're not going to get to most of them. I encourage you to take a look at the email addresses on the slide that you're seeing. David, can you confirm that it's .co or .com? I believe it's .com, and we need to fix that, correct?
Yeah, it's .com, yeah, yes.
Okay, well, that'll be fixed before we send out the slides to everyone. So if you have questions or additional questions, or we haven't answered your question, which is likely going to be the case, feel free to email them and they'll get back to you. So let's go through some questions. Here's a good one, and it's really a matter of opinion, I guess, but how do we get HVAC contractors to speed up on heat pumps?
I'm
No,
going
I
to say when they say heat pumps are a bad idea, you say my research doesn't indicate that. And so, you know, it's giving them pushback and telling them the only thing I'm interested in looking at in terms of a new system is a heat pump. That's going to get their attention.
Yeah, I agree. I want to build what Rob said. Yeah, absolutely. Homeowners now have to have the confidence to say, you know, I know heat pumps works. I want my heat pump alternatives. And as Rob mentioned, and I mentioned, the idea of a heat pump combined with a furnace. A lot of contractors are more comfortable with that scenario, especially on the retrofit world. So by giving them options, saying, okay, contractor, I'm willing to look at options. So those are some ways to do it. But yeah, just keep pushing. Everyone says, I want a heat pump.
And you know, there was a question in there that about it. Somebody said that the mechanical contractor said that they needed to upgrade their 200 amp electric panel. Well, the only reason I can think that you needed to upgrade a 200 amp electric panel is because that contractor thinks they got to put in 15,000 or 20,000 watts of backup electric for that heat pump. So that's an example of where, well, if I did a dual fuel system and I don't have backup electric, almost certainly you don't need to upgrade a 200 amp electric panel to put in a heat pump.
Thanks, guys. Another person asked, who I think she may have missed the very beginning of the of Neil's presentation, so I'll let you, Neil, answer this one. Are you going to explain how heat pumps work? If not, do you recommend any resources to explain how heat pumps work?
I would say take a quick look at Love Electric, and if that doesn't do it, then send us a question. And Josh, is it fair to say that, you know, we won't get to most of these, but if we can print out this list of questions and we can provide answers to people later, right?
That is correct.
Maybe
And
we can send a list. We can answer them and send it out, not with a recording, but maybe sometime next week to everyone or something like that.
yeah. And just to clarify, the URL for Love Electric, Neil, is
loveelectric.org. Love
Yeah.
Electric, all just one word, no hyphen or anything.
great. Kim asked, what is the difference between a cold climate heat pump and a high efficiency heat pump? And this would serve as a reiteration of what we described.
Well, Dave, I think that's a good one for you, but you only get 1 minute.
I was going to punt that too. The main difference is inside the heat pump. It's called inverter compressor, which means it can vary its speed up and down. But the two other things is cold climates can really work well, let's say below 10 degrees outdoor. They can work down. Some can work to -4, -5, -10. And the other thing about cold climates is the capacity to heat is much greater at lower temperatures. So a high efficiency one, the reason I say down to 20 degrees is their ability to heat drops off as it gets colder, a fair amount. So at 20, that's about the limit they can do. Whereas a cold climate, 10 degrees or 0 degrees, they hold their capacity, their ability to heat down at colder temperatures much much more. And there's a bunch of specs which your contractors or Neil or Love can talk about. You can look at, but that's the basic thing.
Yeah, great answer.
There's a website, the Northeast Energy Department, the NEEP, that maintains a database of cold climate heat pumps. So that's a really good resource for that.
Yeah, people need to know though, high efficiencies work in Colorado combined with a furnace. Like, don't think it's not cold climate, it can't work in Colorado. So you really we have great options from the state.
And thanks, Rob, for mentioning NEEP. We love NEEP. Brett is asking a good question about heat pump water heaters. He's wondering if someone could maybe give a brief overview. I know we didn't discuss it that much in this presentation, but maybe we can do a whole webinar on heat pump water heaters at some point.
Well, let me just say, we also have a nice introduction and explanation of heat pump water heaters at the Love Electric website. And basically, they have a heat pump that takes heat out of the air and transfers it to the water. And they also have like a electric resistance element to sort of complement. And they work very well, and there's a few challenges, but read what we have on Love Electric. So some other resources listed there as well, and let us know what other questions you have.
Thank you. Katie is asking about an order of operations. Would it be best to blow insulation into the roof to get solar panels before getting a heat pump or mini splits?
Yes, absolutely. First thing you do is you improve your shell so that you have a lower heat load. That way you can then you can buy smaller equipment. And so that's, do the shell first, absolutely.
And with regards to solar, it depends on whether your heating equipment's old or not. So, if your furnace or your AC is getting old and needs replaced, then I would say, go with getting a heat pump. If it's young, if it's not very old, then get the solar first.
And along the same line of questioning, how do you deal with sealing up the existing ductwork if you convert to 100% ductless mini splits? Any idea?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I guess they would just detach, say, the furnace unit from it, and then you would just do sheet metal, and you can seal it off. At least in the main, in the mechanical room. I don't know, at each vent, there's not like a standard way to do it, but one could have the contractor like cut nice foam and just put it down into each vent or something like that. So it's not overly complicated.
And how do you replace just your furnace and not the air conditioning system if the heat pump does both heating and cooling and needs to be located outside?
But remember, that was just sorry, go ahead.
Well, you can't do that, right? Because if you're replacing the furnace, you're replacing the furnace with a furnace, right? And if you're leaving the air conditioner in place, then you're not putting in a heat pump, because it's literally sitting on top of that furnace that heat pump is located. So, or the inside part of it is. And so maybe that was a misunderstanding of what David was trying to explain there.
Yeah, let me explain that. That was more if your furnace goes bad and you have like a new air conditioner and you have a gas furnace. You don't necessarily then want to throw away that young air conditioner. So you put a furnace in, and then that in 5 years or 8 years or 7 years, when the air conditioner goes bad or is getting really old, then you're going to take that air conditioner out from the outside location. As Rob says, you basically put the heat pump in that spot. So it's more of a time thing.
Douglas in New Mexico has a question about discounts and rebates. Most vendors are unaware of the POS discount in the IRA, that's the Inflation Reduction Act, as it has not been implemented yet in Albuquerque. I need to buy mini splits and a heat pump water heater for my house now. Will I be allowed to apply for it later? Do we know the answer to this?
Well, yeah, it's the federal tax credit that I was talking about is just like any tax credit. When you do your taxes next year for 2023, then you provide the information about how much you spent on your heat pump and your heat pump water heater, and you will get the $2,000 tax credit.
Great, thank you. Gary is asking, can a heat pump be retrofitted to an existing radiant in-floor heating system?
That's a Dave question.
Well, there are air to water heat pumps available. They're very common in Europe and Japan. Canada has some manufacturers for them. The difficulty is that just the supply chain is not really developed in Colorado. That's just, that's the issue right now. There's not contractors who are even routinely doing them at all. So it's like a very customized system. There's like one or two designers in Colorado who will do it. So you can do it, but realize it's, and I'm not discouraging. It's just going to be a custom job. It's going to be really expensive. Hopefully in the next few years, the technology is ramping fast. More people are bringing equipment. So I think it'll be more routine in the future. We can have a separate webinar on ground source heat pumps. Those are a possibility too.
I was going to say, if you go to most mechanical contractors today and say, I want an air to water heat pump, they'll say that doesn't exist. They're just so unfamiliar with that technology in the United States right now.
Yeah, they don't want to take the risk of a totally new thing. So that's the difficulty right at the moment.
Josh, can we before you go to the next one, I did see that somebody wanted us to maybe say something about geothermal or ground source heat pumps. So Dave, do you want to just say like 1 or 2 minutes, like what do you think is a possible role for ground source heat pumps versus air source?
So, okay, the thing about it is air source heat pump technology has evolved so much. It's become really good. So I guess this is the way I was thinking about it. I was thinking about this morning. If you have a house that's, say, big number, 2,500 square feet or less, and that means that if it's a good, well-built house, you can do it with one, like you can heat that with one, say, 5-ton air source heat pump. And so that's the most cost-effective way to go. If you have a bigger house, which is going to require more units, or you have a radiant house and you're willing to pay some extra money for the ground source, those are two places where the ground source heat pump systems would make sense to explore and look at. I think bigger commercial or community buildings, things like that, bigger buildings with long-term thinking, it makes sense also. That's like the 2-minute one. But we should have a webinar separate on ground source heat pumps at some point in the future.
Thank you. That's good. I just didn't want to totally skip over that. I know sometimes people want to know, like, well, what about geothermal or ground source? Why aren't we talking about that? So that's good enough. Josh, go ahead. We got time for a few more, I think.
Sure. Someone is asking, why do you need a backup for a negative 20 degree heat pump when it pretty much never gets below negative 20 in Colorado?
Well, it's really between like 5 degrees, and so it's like when the outdoor temperature gets below 5 degrees, even these cold climate heat pumps, I said that they hold their heating capacity really well, but when they get to 5 degrees or so, even though they still can heat when it's really cold, they do start to taper off in terms of how much heat they can put out. So think about between like 5 degrees outdoor and the times when our cold snaps when it gets in the negatives, there's going to be like a wedge where the cold climate doesn't, it can, if you want your house to be 50 or 40, it can do it. But if you want to keep your house at 72, you're going to need a little bit of extra from gas or electrical. So that's really.
Can I just say, I think you and I agree on this, Dave, that in climate zone 5, if it's a new home, you don't need a backup furnace if you're putting in a cold climate heat pump, but maybe climate zone 6 and 7, it's debatable. The cold climate heat pump is going to work well down to like 0 or -5, and you might save a little money, or it might make sense to put in a backup furnace for those areas.
Those areas you really need to. I mean, in the mildest climate zones, you might be able to get away with one or just the smallest amount of backup. I mean, we're not talking a lot of backup. I'm talking like a 5 kilowatt, which most people doesn't make any sense, but just a little bit as kind of insurance.
We're doing all kinds of cold climate heat pumps with no backup in Salt Lake City and Denver. So, but that's multifamily, right? So you've got it's easier to heat that, right? So it's all about your comfort level. What do you can you tolerate having your house get down to 55 degrees once a year?
Right.
Then don't do backup.
And the smaller ones are a little, like if you're a 2-ton or less heat pump, you're probably not going to need a backup. When you get to bigger ones, then you're going to need a little backup, 4 or 5 tons. So.
Charles is asking, are heat pumps a viable alternative to central gas heat in a 70-plus-year-old cinder block home?
Probably not until you fix those walls.
Insulate the walls and then do it. I did it. Well, this was ground source, but 15 years ago, 100-year-old stone walled house. And they had very little opportunity to insulate, and it took so much heating. It was unbelievable. But yeah, Rob's right. Insulate the walls, and then the heat pump's awesome. Worked great.
Jess is asking, there's lots of talk about dual fuel heat pumps with furnaces, but are there dual fuel options for baseboard boiler heating?
Not really. I mean, you'd have to put like a water coil on the furnace to provide the heat. It becomes just a complicated type of system there. Unless you just leave the existing boiler in place, put in mini splits and have that as your primary heat. And when it can't keep up, then the boiler kicks on. That would be one way you could do that. That's
the way to do it. Because the problem is you have to have 150-degree water, which is really high and really hard. So Rob's just go with mini splits. Figure out the biggest rooms you can do with the mini split. Put the mini split in, it'll do most of the house. And then you'll have to figure out a way to turn the radiant down in those rooms. But yeah, 5 to 10 years, they'll have systems that'll do that. We're on the verge of it now, where there's systems that'll be able to put out super high hot water, but we're a little bit ahead of that curve.
All right, and then how about one final question? There's an attendee asking, can you comment on the useful life of a heat pump compared to that of a standard AC? Well, she's asking heat pump AC compared to that of a standard AC.
Dave, I think that's you.
It should be around the same, like all the manufacturers and everyone's saying in the studies that it's going to be around 15 years or 17 years. And the way to think about it is like, we'll use the heat pump a lot of hours heating here. But if I threw an air conditioner in Florida and Texas, I would be using it for tons of hours there. So it's like their hours of total cooling equals ours. So, that's kind of where it's at. The simple answer is about the same as the air conditioner, around 15 years.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Our time is up. So if you had missed what I said, you can email Neil, Rachel, David, or Rob. Those emails that you see on your screen here, just to confirm, Dave's email is .com, not .co. You can go on our website, swenergy.org. You may be a little confused because we have changed our branding and we're launching a new website in a matter of weeks. So we couldn't wait. So what you're looking at now is our new logo. And we were very excited to do that first. So you can also go for a wealth of information on loveelectric.org, as Neil was talking about a number of times during the presentation, for heat pump information, heat pump water heater information, the case studies that Rachel presented. And we're going to be sending out a recording and the full slide deck within a day or two. So keep an eye out for that and send it to anyone who might be interested. Sign up for our newsletter on swenergy.org. We promise not to spam you. And check out that NBC News article that was posted on Valentine's Day. Neil Callaway from Sweep is quoted, and it's just a general overview of how popular they're getting. So it's nice to receive that news coverage 2 days ago. And thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate it, and keep an eye out for the next webinars on this very topic. I'm sure there will be more. So thanks very much. Have a great rest of your week. And thanks, Neil, Dave, Rachel, and Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.